Welcome to 21st Sports Recap and Reaction for the Houston Texans and the Buffalo Bills in their Week 13 matchup played December 6th. We're going to go over every possession and break down the stats and give our analysis. And both of these teams were in the playoff hunt. Of course, the Texans entered the day tied for first in the AFC South, and the Bills were in the wild card chase, desperately needing a win. Of course, the Texans were on a 4-game winning streak, and the Buffalo Bills entered the game having lost their last 2. But starting off this game, the Bills would stop the Texans on their first possession, forcing them to go 3 and out, and Buffalo would take over at midfield on their own 47, and they would get down into Houston territory and then into the red zone. They got a big play from Gillespie, who ran 30 yards all the way down to the 10-yard line. And then on 3rd and goal from the 3, T-Mobile Tyrod Taylor hit Sammy Watkins for a 3-yard touchdown. Dan Carpenter added the extra point, and it was 7-0 Buffalo over Houston, with just over 9.5 minutes still left to play in the first. So now after the kickoff, the Texans would take over on their own 20, and they would start moving the ball down the field, and they would get into Buffalo territory when Polk ran 20 yards on a 1st and 10 from the 33 that brought the ball to the Buffalo 47. And on 3rd and 1 from the 38, Hoyer hit Lamb for a 7-yard reception. And then on a 3rd and 7 from the Buffalo 28, Grimes ended up running 17 yards for a first down at the Buffalo 11 as they were now in the red zone. And then 2 plays later, Brian Hoyer hit Ryan Griffin for an 8-yard touchdown. And now they would end up going for the extra point, but it ended up being missed by Novak. And so Buffalo remained in the lead 7-6 over Houston. And that was just under 4 minutes left in the first. So now Buffalo would take over after the kickoff on their own 29, and on 2nd and 8 from the 31, LaShawn Shady McCoy ripped a 32-yard run, and that brought the ball all the way to the Houston 37 for the first down. The Bills were then faced with a 3rd and 7 from the 34, and T-Mobile Tyrod Taylor hit Clay for a 12-yard reception. It was a first down now at the 22, and they would end up getting into the red zone as McCoy ran for 9 yards, but then he got stuffed for no gain. But on 3rd and 1 from the 13, Shady ended up picking up 5 yards, and so that brought the first quarter to a close, and the second quarter would open up with the Bills on the Houston 8, 1st and goal, and Tyrod Taylor runs it in himself, an 8-yard touchdown run, and with the extra point by Carpenter, Buffalo extended their lead to 8 points with the score Bills 14, Texans 6, just seconds into the second quarter. So now the Bills would end up holding the Texans to punt on their next possession after 7 plays, but the Texans would force the Bills to go 3 and out on their next possession as they would punt the ball back to Houston. So now the Texans would take over on their own 40 after the punt. They would get into Buffalo territory. They got down into the red zone, and they converted on a 3rd and 1 to keep their drive alive in the red zone on the 13-yard line. And so now, after the 2-yard run by Hoyer, it was 1st and 10 on the 11, and Hoyer hits Polk for an 11-yard touchdown. And so now Novak would kick the extra point, and it was once again a 1-point game with the Bills up 14-13. Now with just under 4 minutes left before halftime. So now the Bills would take over after the kickoff on their own 29-yard line. On their first play of this possession, T-Mobile Tyrod Taylor hits Sammy Watkins for a 53-yard reception. And so now it was a first down in the red zone at the Houston 18-yard line. Shady picked up 6 yards on the ground. An incomplete pass brought up 3rd down, and Tyrod Taylor ended up running for 6 yards as this game went to the 2-minute warning. And now coming out of the 2-minute warning, it was a 1st and goal on the 6 for the Bills. They were then faced with a 3rd and goal on the 2, and Tyrod Taylor hits Robert Woods for the 2-yard touchdown. Carpenter adds the extra point, and it was 21-13 with just half a minute left before halftime. So the Bills went into halftime up by 8, 21-13. So then the second half, it was all defense to start off, as the Bills would go 3 and out on their first possession of the second half. The Texans would end up punting after 5 plays. The Bills would then punt on their next possession after 6 plays. The Texans would punt after 6 plays as well on their next possession. And so now Buffalo, backed up against their end zone after the punt with the ball on their own 9, started to move the ball a little. So they got a huge play. Another 53-yard reception by Watkins, as Tyrod Taylor hipped up with Sammy Watkins. And now it's first down at the Houston 38, but their drive would stall on the 32, and Dan Carpenter would come out to attempt the 50-yard field goal, but it was no good. So the kick was no good, and that was with about half a minute left in the third. Houston would then bring the third quarter to a close, and they would open up the fourth quarter in Buffalo territory, but they would end up punting from the Buffalo 45 with about 13 and a half minutes still left to play. So now Buffalo would go 3 and out on their next possession, and Houston would take over on their own 17. So it's 1st and 10 from the Houston 17, and Hoyer hooks up with DeAndre Hopkins for a 23-yard reception. That made a first down at the 40. They were then faced with a 3rd and 1 from the 49. Hoyer goes back to Hopkins. He picks up 29 yards, and now it's first down at the Buffalo 22. Polk picked up 3 yards, and that's up 2nd and 7 at the Buffalo 19 on the red zone. And Hoyer connects with DeAndre Hopkins for a 19-yard touchdown. They went for 2. They gave it to Grimes, and he got it in, and the 2-point conversion would make it a tied game at 21 apiece with just over 9 minutes left to play in this game. So it's a tie game with plenty of time left on the clock in the fourth, and the Texans defense would come up with a big stop as they forced the Bills to punt after 4 plays on their next possession. But then the Bills come up with a big stop of their own, forcing a 3 and out by the Texans. But then the Texans forced a 3 and out by the Bills. But the Bills came right back and forced another 3 and out by the Texans. And so now the Texans would be forced to punt to the Bills with 2.5 minutes left to play in this game, tied up at 21. The Bills had it on their own 35, and then a holding penalty pushed them back to their 25. But then on first down, Taylor goes to Hogan, he picks up 12, and on second down, 2nd and 8 from the 37, McCoy picks up 20 yards on the ground to make it a first down in Houston territory at the 43. Gillespie runs 3 yards to bring the game to the 2-minute warning. And so now it's 2nd and 7 on the Houston 40 coming out of the 2-minute warning. And Tyrod Taylor hooks up with Charles Clay for a 40-yard touchdown. Dan Carpenter goes to the extra point, but he hit the upright. And so it was 27-21 as the Bills were now in the lead by 6 with less than 2 minutes left to play. And so now Houston would take over after the kickoff on their own 20. And an incomplete pass on first down would bring up 2nd and 10. An incomplete pass on second down would bring up 3rd and 10. And an incomplete pass on third down would bring up 4th and 10. Still on the Houston 20. And a 4th incomplete pass in a row would turn the ball over on downs right there on the 20. And so now the Bills would take over on the edge of the red zone at the Houston 20. And they weren't able to really get anywhere. They picked up 2 yards on a run by Taylor on third down, but Carpenter came out to attempt a 36-yard field goal. This one went through the uprights, and now it was a 9-point lead for Buffalo with just over half a minute left in this game. But the Texans would get the ball one last time, and they would end up getting into Buffalo territory when on 3rd and 6 from the 49, Hoyer went to Cecil Shorts the third for a 23-yard pass. They ended up with a 1st and 10 at the 28, and it was the final play of the game, just 3 seconds left, and easily intercepts Hoyer, adding a little insult to injury as the Buffalo Bills win this one 30-21. They come away with a big win at home, coming up clutch down the stretch as the Texans had tied this one up there in the 4th. But then the Bills end up scoring 9 unanswered points to close out the game and win by 9. And with the win, the Buffalo Bills now 6-6 on the season. They're at 500. They're 3-3 at home. The Texans fall below 400 on the road. They're 2-4. They're 500 on the season at 6-6. And of course, the Colts will be playing the Steelers on Sunday Night Football with the AFC South, title in the balance. If the Colts win, they go up by a game. If they lose, then the Texans will remain tied in first place. But they'll have to sit and wait to see what happens on Sunday Night Football. But the Bills coming up with the win, still keeping themselves in the playoff hunt. The Jets won as well, so the Bills are still in third place in the East, but they're still alive as this day actually entered with, I believe, 84% of the teams still alive in the playoff hunt. I think it was 27 teams in the league that still were alive entering the day, and the Buffalo Bills needing the win. They come away with it, and now they're at 500. And Tyrod Taylor coming up with some big plays in this game as he's been having quite the season. And in this game, Tyrod Taylor, 11-21, 211 passing yards, but 3 touchdowns. He also had a rushing touchdown, 7 carries for 28 yards, 4 total touchdowns for T-Mobile Tyrod Taylor. And LaShawn Shane McCoy also had a big game, 21 carries for 112 rushing yards. And Sammy Watkins, 3 receptions for 109 yards and a touchdown. And also Charles Clay, 4 receptions for 66 yards and a touchdown. Robert Woods also had a touchdown, as he only had 2 receptions, one of which was that touchdown. He also had 19 yards on the game. And for the Texans, Brian Hoyer, 26 for 43, 293 passing yards. He had 3 touchdowns and the 1 interception, of course, that came on the final play of the game. And Polk, 12 carries for 61 yards. And Cecil Shorts III was their leading receiver with 6 receptions for 91 yards. DeAndre Hopkins had 5 receptions for 88 yards and a touchdown. And for the kickers in this game, for the Bills, Dan Carpenter was 1 for 2 on the field goals, 3 for 4 on the extra points. And for the Texans, Nick Novak did not attempt a field goal. He was 1 for 2 on the extra points. And for the defense for Buffalo, Hughes and Rambo each had sacks, and Easley had an interception. Of course, that was the final play of the game. And for the Texans, Jadeveon Clowney had a sack. And then we look at the team stats, 21 first downs for the Texans, 15 first downs for the Bills. On third down, the Bills 8 for 16, 50% conversion rate, 7 for 15 for the Texans, 46% conversion rate. The Texans went for it once on fourth down, did not convert. And that was that 4 straight incomplete passes there after Clay had that 40-yard touchdown reception. They turned the ball over on downs and pretty much gave the 3 points to Buffalo as they extended the lead there. And then we look at the net yards in this game, 401 for the Texans, 390 for Buffalo. And for the Bills, they had 187 net rushing yards, 126 for the Texans. And through the air, Houston had 275 net passing yards, 203 netted for the Bills. As we saw Tyrod Taylor sacked just once for a loss of 8 yards, and Brian Hoyer was sacked twice for a loss of 18 total yards. Penalties really cost the Texans in this game. 10 penalties for 89 yards. Just 5 penalties against Buffalo for 42 yards. And then we look at the red zone in this game. The Texans were perfect, 3 for 3. Buffalo 3 for 4, 75%. Of course, they were in the red zone there when they got that final field goal of the game, when they started off in the red zone on that possession after those 4 incomplete passes, turned the ball over on downs there at the end. But time of possession, 31 minutes, 53 seconds for the Texans, 28 minutes, 7 seconds for the Bills. That was the thing, the Texans, they did what you would have thought would have been enough to win this game, but the Bills making the timely plays, and that's the thing, Tyrod Taylor, maybe he doesn't have the highest completion percentage, but he is clutch. He comes up with the big plays when they need it the most. He is the definition of clutch. And the Texans struggling on the ground. They didn't really, they got some production on the ground, but not enough. If they could have got more production out of that ground game, then maybe they could have came away with this one. Of course, also their defense down the stretch, not making the big stops, they made a few mistakes and they were costly, especially that 40-yard touchdown there. And then even, they were playing really solid in the second half. It was all defense, no score in the third quarter, and we only saw a total of 17 points scored in the second half. Of course, all of those coming in the fourth quarter. Of course, 9 of those points came in the last 2 minutes, and 3 of those points were kind of give me. But the Texans, they came close, but they couldn't do enough. In Buffalo, like I said, they came up with the clutch plays. And Tyrod Taylor getting it done. He's having a really big season up there in Buffalo. And if you're not a fan of his yet, well, what are you waiting for? The guy has been having a phenomenal season. 4 touchdowns in this game, the 3 passing, the 1 rushing. Of course, coming up with that big touchdown pass with less than 2 minutes left that put them ahead, which would eventually be the go-ahead and the winning score of this game. And the Bills staying alive, as they've got quite a tough defense, and they get it done on offense as well. Of course, Shady having a big game, getting a lot of production out of the backfield with LaShawn McCoy. And when he can put up over 100 yards, Buffalo usually comes away with the W. Of course, as I said, Tyrod Taylor with his phenomenal performance as well. And Houston, it was a tight game. It really came down the stretch. And almost, they almost won this one, but they just couldn't get it done. They couldn't get the points that they needed, and they didn't ever get into field goal range. Well, at least they didn't go for any field goals. And if you can't get it in the field goal range, well, then that puts your team in a tough position that they got to score touchdowns against a tough Buffalo defense. And of course, the Texans also, their defense was not really getting after, they were getting some pressure on Taylor, but they didn't force any turnovers. And that was the thing, is there wasn't really too many turnovers in this game, just the 1 interception on the final play, as both teams were doing a good job of taking care of the ball. But the Texans, they had to come up with some big plays on defense to set up their offense if they were going to beat Buffalo on the road, and they weren't able to do that. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. Definitely interested to read your thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much for listening. It's greatly appreciated. I hope you're having a good day and having a great weekend and enjoying all the sports.